Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. It's afternoon here for us. I hope you're all doing well and I hope you can hear us. We just had a question there today, something different to get our session started. Welcome and get to know you more, especially on topic today. We're talking about immigration refusals, know your options, and plan your next move. So Asha and I, for those of us who don't know, for those of you who may not know us, Florence Akpan here and Asha Ali, one of our consultants, we will be chatting today and talking about Canadian immigration refusals and how you can better prepare for that, know your options and what you need to do. So I will be taking questions as we go along. We have a quick 1 hour session here today. So use the question box to leave any questions related to a refused immigration application that you would like to add. We really want to stay on topic today so that we can address some of the concerns on and around this topic. All right. So we're going to get started as we wait for more people to join us here. We're live on Instagram, we're live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube as well. We're going to wait for more people to join in. But if you can hear us, say hi, say hello to let us know that you can hear us. And of course, use the question box to leave your questions. I'll be picking up questions from both Instagram and StreamYard platform here. So thank you everyone for joining. And we're going to get right into it. Asha, what are the common reasons? What are the common types of refusals that you see? And we've categorized how we want to talk about this. So what's the first one that we know and we see all the time?
Well, the first one that we see a lot of the time is errors from the applicant, the principal applicant on the application. They made a mistake during their application at some point. Whether it's a temporary resident application or a permanent residency application, it's not uncommon for people to unintentionally forget to upload documents or maybe not structure the application quite the way that it's meant to be structured. So overall, I would say the most common, issue in terms of getting refusals is because there's been some sort of gap that came from the client side.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And in addition to that, believe it or not, we have also seen situations where applications have been refused due to errors from IRCC. So not just you making the error, IRCC makes errors as well on applications. And we've seen applications be refused because of that as well. Several ones where maybe the documents were not looked at properly that were included in the application, and or you had sent things in and it just did not get to the officer and things like that. We've seen where communication has been misinterpreted. We've seen situations where an officer has misinterpreted messages that has actually been sent, or information or verification or eligibility check that they've done. They have misinterpreted that and it has actually led to application refusals as well. So these are the different reasons that sometimes we see that people just assume, oh, you think it's your fault. Sometimes it is the applicant's fault not knowing the application requirement properly. But then we've seen it also be IRCC as well. What other one have we seen, Asha?
Client eligibility. So, for example, somebody doesn't fully understand what is actually required to apply for something. One that we've seen a lot recently is clients applying for postgraduate work permit application extensions, although they're not eligible. So that could be a reason. If you put in an application for an open work permit and you're not eligible for an open work permit, your application is going to be refused. So that's just one of many examples. There's a lot of other situations in which somebody might not fully understand the full eligibility and as a result apply for something they're quite not eligible for, and as a result of that application would get refused.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Those ones are, of course, when you see the letter, you'll know, because IRCC will sometimes write there that you are not eligible for the program, the refusal that comes or something. And we see that a lot more with in Canada applications, where maybe someone is applying for an extension, applying for a PGWP and all of that, and then they're actually not eligible for that type of application that they're applying for. So we see a lot of that. The next one here that we see is usually also technical difficulty. Believe it or not, we have seen situations where applications have been refused due to technical difficulty. I'll give you guys an example on this one. There was one of our clients that we did an application for, and IRCC had asked for medicals. medicals was requested, and we sent in the medicals. At InfoPlace Canada, we have a very detailed process of keeping track of everything we do. And then the refusal came and said that the document was not transmitted. Of course, we did not accept that refusal, because we knew that we had done everything that we needed to do for our clients and we had records of it. So we went back to IRCC and we even showed them that we knew that there was some technical difficulty, because we had done a lot of applications and we had seen so many different responses from IRCC, and we knew that there was something quite off with this one that wasn't aligned with the typical flow of things that we would see in certain applications that we have. And thankfully, when we did that request and pulled all the documents together, to advocate for the client, to fight for that decision that was unfair, we were able to turn that around. So technical difficulty come up from time to time in applications as well. So the web form could be down. You could have transmitted a document, it didn't get to IRCC for whatever reason, and then the officer refuses the application because they feel like you did not respond on time or provide what was required. It's so important that you're aware that these are certain things that could lead to the refusal of applications as well. Right. So welcome everyone as you've come in. We are just chatting here about common things we see about refusals. So feel free to use the chat box and leave us comments or questions around anything you would need help with dealing with your refusals or someone that you know as well. All right, Asha. So we've talked about some of these different things with refusals. What are the things we always tell people once someone contacts us and they've typically been refused? Where are we starting out from?
Well, I guess the first step is looking at the refusal letter and seeing what exactly the refusal letter says. Sometimes sometimes the refusal letter alone is not enough, right? So in a lot of our temporary resident applications, like our study permits or visiting visas, even our work permits, the next step is GCMS notes, having a better idea of exactly why that officer refused the application and seeing kind of the rationale and the thought process behind it. So typically it's going to be GCMS note as the first step.
Yeah, absolutely. GCMS note, after the GCMS note, when the GCMS note comes back, it gives, so people who don't know what a GCMS note is, I think right now it's so popular because everyone almost knows about it. But just in case you don't, it's a detailed immigration officer's note that contains more information than what is actually shared with you on your refusal letter. Most refusal letters are very generic. They're literally check boxes that the officer just needs to check off, like this is most related to the reason why I refused this person, but the details as to why. So for example, they could check off proof of funds that you didn't have enough money, but a GCMS note is going to tell us that, well, you may have had enough money, so you're surprised, you're upset, oh, I'm not supposed to have had this refusal. But the GCMS note is going to tell us why the officer felt you didn't have enough money. And it could have been because they don't take the money that you have because they didn't know how the money was raised. They don't know the source of that income. They don't know the source of that money. So that way, they don't know where it's coming from. So those are some of the things that the GCMS note reveals for you. We've had situations where a student was refused because an officer thinks, like a student is applying for an extension, and an officer refuses the application because they think this person is not a genuine student and it's not a genuine temporary resident and all that. And you're just confused. Like, I have admission. I've included this for you. Why are you refusing my application? The GCMS note again reveals all the things that the officer looks at, right? I had a client once that came to us after they'd been refused 2 times to extend their study permit in Canada. The first time they contacted me, I said, do GCMS note. Of course, they didn't. They went ahead and reapplied. It was refused. And then the second time they came back, we requested the GCMS note. And it was funny because the officer said the concerns in the first GCMS notes were not addressed. So it's very annoying, I must say, because you don't see the GCMS note. The average person who is applying to Canada doesn't even know that this exists, except you do that research yourself. But it was like there were questions for this particular child because this kid had come to Canada, was going to school, but was not going to school consistently, was failing out of school. And the officer needed an explanation as to why the grades were not good. And this was one of the main reasons why the officer refused to extend that study permit. But then talking to the client had a valid reason why they were not in school. and why they could not continue going to school. However, those reasons were not included in the application to support that extension. So getting the GCMS note is always very important, like Asha said. Now, when it reveals the things that you see, then you can confidently attack a reapplication if there were gaps in your application. And before we talk about the gaps in the application, the second thing would be when the GCMS comes, and we've seen situations where the GCMS note comes and we find that it reveals that stuff we talked about a few minutes ago, where it's like it could have been refused because of an error from the visa officer. The visa officer may not have seen the documents properly. So I'll give you guys an example. We had a client that we did an application for, and that she had already paid her full tuition fee. So all she needed to show in money was just living expense. So let's assume now living expense is 20,635 for a student. So she had bank statement that only had 20,635, and the officer refused it because she did not have enough money. And when we saw the GCMS note, we saw that that was all the officer looked at. The officer did not actually look at the tuition deposit document that was included to show that this client had completely paid all of the application. So we requested a reconsideration, drawing the officer's attention back to everything that was already included in the application to show that there was enough money, the fees were paid, and all of that. And that particular case was reopened. So that's typically a good time. When you see the GCMS note, you see that there is a gap, you're reading it. And we've done this long enough sometimes to actually see where an officer actually reviewed the application, or where AI, artificial intelligence, may have been involved in that decision process, that the details in the application may not have been carefully reviewed. So we use that as well to advocate and go back to the officer and give them a second opportunity to take a look at the application again and see if there was something missed, because we're confident that the application had all it's included. Now, a lot of times what we do too is most of those reconsiderations are on applications that we do, because we're very confident that if we're working with you, we would have covered everything that is typically required to make your application really strong as well. So after reconsideration, Asha, what are our next options if that doesn't work? Because as I talk about reconsideration, full disclosure, it's not all the time that we get those applications reconsidered. It's not all the time that someone requests a reconsideration and the officer reopens the application again. So when that doesn't happen, what are the other options that an applicant has?
Another option is to reapply, right? Like when we get the GCMS notes, we know exactly what the officer was concerned with. If it's something that was addressed in the prior application, we can address it again in a reapplication and ensure all of our bases are covered. If it's something new that maybe potentially wasn't covered, then now we have the opportunity to cover that and address those GCMS notes in great detail. So yeah, like Florence said, reconsideration, sometimes they can be successful, sometimes they aren't. So the next option is to just reapply and see if by addressing those GCMS notes and addressing those officers' concerns, we can get a different outcome.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So very important, after the GCMS notes, sometimes you still go through the lens of actually having the GCMS notes done. And we're just putting this on here so that you can see. If you're listening and you have questions as we're talking, feel free to leave your questions in the chat. And we will be taking questions shortly here, because we have enough time to answer some questions today. After the GCMS note is done, reconsideration, if it's possible, you could do that. If that doesn't work, you have the option to do a reapplication, especially if you were not banned. You have the option to do a reapplication, because of course, if you got a ban, then you can't do a reapplication, except that ban was in error. And we've also had cases, we've been able to overturn bans for our clients as well. Now, if you go all the way to reapplication, it's not working. Sometimes people reapply multiple times. But when you've had a very strong case, you've addressed every potential concern that should have been addressed in your application and all, the next thing is to explore the option of a judicial review. So a judicial review is basically taking the case, your application as is, working with a lawyer, a Canadian immigration lawyer. We have lawyers that we work with who help our clients that need to go through judicial review take the case to federal court. And when it goes to federal court, usually it's what is the application that was submitted that is presented in federal court for a decision. If the application is strong, if it's it contained every information, then it would be sent back for redetermination. basically the application gets reopened again. A lot of times going for JR does not necessarily guarantee that, hey, the application will be finally approved. But when you have a strong case, you have a good chance of potentially receiving a positive decision in your application as well, if when that happens. So those are the steps that typically happen. Those are the steps that you typically walk through. Those are the things that you typically get to see when you're doing your application and you're running through all of those challenges. An application has been refused, you know that you have options and ways to turn it around. Right now, there's a lot of IRCC is very strict on so many things. So when you see refusals, you don't just want to take it, especially if you have put together a strong and convincing application. You want to make sure that you have addressed all the concerns on your application. All right. Any questions from anyone? Any questions? We're not seeing any questions here. We just want to make sure we're not missing anything. And can everyone still hear us? If you can hear us, please type a yes from whatever platform you're joining from. We just want to see that everyone can still hear us. Asha, what would be an interesting refusal that you've seen recently that was just like, what the hell, what's going on here?
An interesting one that I've seen recently. There was somebody who applied for an open study permit for her minor child. And IRCC refused the application and said that she was not enrolled in a bachelor, master's, PhD, or eligible field of study program.
Mm-hmm.
So what they did was use the logic of spousal open work permit towards this minor kid. And I was like, what are they doing?
It's just crazy.
Yeah, that one was like very mind-blowing. It was like, I cannot believe that's what they're doing. So that's a good example of officers not always issuing the right decisions or providing us with the right refusal letter, or there's always things that happen behind the scenes that are investigation.
Absolutely. So we have some questions on Instagram actually. Someone said here, I applied for my husband's open work permit and IRCC is asking for LMIA, which he doesn't need. We attached my postgraduate work permit and he was still refused. What can I do? Asha, what do you think happened there?
Well, my question is, what kind of job did they include a job offer?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think it was January 21st.
First, yeah.
So we had new kind of tiers in NACA codes that have been, listed out in terms of eligibility for spousal open work permits of PGWP holders. So if you didn't have a job offer in tier 0, tier 1, or those select tier 2, tier 3 NACA codes, that could have confused the officer, leading them to not understand what you were applying for, and then refusing it on the basis that there wasn't an LMIA, because if you didn't have the qualifying job offer, then your husband actually was not eligible to apply.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think that would be the thing to check, especially now that it all depends on the time you applied as well.
Mm-hmm.
And also now that there is the change in policy, you want to make sure you're in the right job and you're including all of your employment documents. So not just your postgraduate work permit, job offer, employment pay slips are very important because IRCC is scrutinizing even job offers in Canada right now. So job offer letter is not enough. You need to show pay slips that you're actually getting paid in that job as part of that application. Joy Ozumba has a question here. She said, when a student does not meet up with second tuition payment, would that affect the person's application? So Joy, here, it would depend on, it would really depend on if you have submitted the application or you're going to still eventually be able to pay your fees before you submit the application. If you're owing tuition fees and all of that, that could potentially affect your application for extension because you are going to be telling IRCC in your extension, you need to provide proof of funds for the remainder of your tuition fee, for the remainder of your living expense in Canada. So it's crucial that you actually have that money in place and pay those fees. In fact, one of the things we always include to strengthen our study permit extension application is proof that the student has complied with all of the study permits regulation and also paid their complete fees, right? So I would say it's very important to as part of the application process. Yeah. Okay. Asha, Ash K here has a question. I am currently working as an ad developer and I'm looking for a job opportunity. What is the process through? This is not an immigration question, so find another immigration question. Anyone on StreamYard there? I'm just looking through Instagram. I want to ask a question on this new pilot. Can someone who is on visiting visa apply? There's so many new pilots. What pilot are you actually talking about? Oh, he said the new caregiver. Can you talk about the new caregiver?
Yeah, so caregiver, IRCC still hasn't given us the full details of the caregiver pilot. There's a little bit of limited information here, but what we do know is overall, they've broken it down into 2 streams. The first stream is workers in Canada. Second stream, applicants not working in Canada. So when IRCC opens up on March 31st, 2025, so in a couple of weeks here, they're only going to be accepting applications from the workers in Canada stream. That's the first thing to note. In terms of eligibility, what they're looking for is CLB level 4 in either French or English, the equivalent of high school diploma, at least 6 months of recent and relevant work experience or related caregiving credential. Those are 2 areas that we're still waiting on further details from because we need to know exactly what they deem to be recent and relevant and what they deem to be a related caregiving training credential. But the final thing is have a job offer for a full-time home care job. So IRCC wants to see you have a job offer. We're still waiting for a list of NOCs that hasn't been released right now, but that is the information that we do know for right now. If it does sound like something that you could potentially qualify for, you're in country, you have Canadian work experience in line with caregiving, then it could potentially be something for you.
Yeah. Yes, I hope it's already May 6th. So
March 6th.
IRCC should be, sorry, March 6th. IRCC should literally be giving us information right now so that people can actually prepare.
Yep.
It'll be interesting to see what happens. Yeah. And Nietia says here, I was refused study permit because the officer said he could not clearly see my scanned bank statement, even when I sent the bank statement via web form. Is it that they do not use web form?
So that's actually something that I've seen in GCMS notes kind of reoccur a lot for, external clients, but the quality of how you scan your documents is actually so important. If somebody cannot read your document, they can't understand the document. And the IRCC is not giving you the opportunity to be like, hey, I can't read your bank statement, send me a new one. And if they have done that, they've gone the extra mile for you. That's not common or typical at all. So the quality of uploading your documents is extremely important. I've also noticed just, going through applications and stuff, when you scan a bank statement, you have to ensure that the format is correct. So for example, sometimes banks, when they send over bank statements, they're not formatted accurately and you can't see the final kind of columns there with the closing balance and kind of the fluctuation. Something like that could be an issue. So overall, you just want to ensure that the quality of your bank statement and all of your documents is really high because at the end of the day, it is going to the federal government. The second thing is with web form, it depends because IRCC, when they're asking you for additional document request in the actual ADR, they will specify how they want you to submit information. So if they specify you should upload it to your GC key and they open up a slot and maybe you don't submit it through that slot, they might not see the web form in time and make a decision based on what you had initially uploaded. So it's important to know your deadline and how they want you to upload those documents. Also keep in mind, IRCC uses UTC time. That's very important to know. If your deadline is, let's say, tomorrow, just be sure to convert your current time zone to UTC to ensure that you know when you're supposed to submit the application and how.
Yeah. No, Asha, thank you very much for that. Fully covered on that particular one. I'll take one more here on Instagram and then we'll take the one that just popped up on StreamYard here. I was refused study permit. My dad is the sponsor. In the GCMS note, the officer said my bank statement when noted, but there is insufficient funds to substantiate the source of the funds. Deborah, we see this so much, and it's one of the things that we spend a lot of time with our clients, making sure that this is clearly articulated in the application. IRCC, and I've said this so many times, is that IRCC doesn't care if you have $100 million in your account. If they don't know how the money came, how the money was raised, what the sponsor did to get that money, what type of employment, what type of business, all of that. If that's not clearly shown in the application, and not just mentioning it, right? If it's not clearly shown in the application in clear documentation, the likelihood of the application being refused is also high as well. Because IRCC wants to know where the source of fund is coming. And a lot of times when they see a lot of money, they can't. So I'll give you an example. There was a client once whose application was refused, and they came to us. And what happened was, at this time, it was a while back when the cost to study in Canada was not as high as it is right now. And the client, I think I had like maybe 10 million naira. And at this time, she was doing a job that she was making maybe 100,000, right? So IRCC looked at it, and she had been working for 3 years. Even if she was saving every single, as she said, her source of that 10 million was from her employment. So even if she was saving every single money she was making over the last 3 years, it would not have added up to 10 million. So that there was the question that the officer has. So that, I hope that example kind of clarifies why that's so important and why they want. So when IRCC now saw that you had 10 million, but they can't tell where it came from, they now start questioning if that money is actually yours and if it's actually going to be available for the purpose of your application. So my question to you is, in the application with your dad as your sponsor, what documents were included to show the officer what your dad does for a living and how he raised those funds? If all those types of documents were included, because your source of funds could come from employment, business, investment, whatever it is, if all of those were shown in the application, then you could go back to the officer and request a reconsideration and relook at the application. But if all you had in the application was a sponsorship letter saying that your dad will sponsor you and the bank statement, but no additional supporting documents to show where the money came from, then that could have been where the refusal really stemmed from. I hope that answers your question and provides clarity. Okay, Asha, you go ahead with the one on straight.
All right. This one is a bit of a long one. So Julia's PR application was refused. The visa officer notes stated that following the review of the documents provided, including my employment reference letters, and upon analysis, I am not satisfied that the PA has accumulated at least 1 year of full-time work experience according to the declared primary occupation. My GCMS note was reviewed, and apparently my NOT code did not match my job description. What can I do now? Okay, so a couple of things that we need to consider, right? When you're claiming work experience, I don't know if this is an express entry application, but I'm going to assume it's express
like it. Yeah, PR, yeah.
I'm going to assume it's express entry. So when we're looking at eligibility, again, you didn't specify whether it was CEC or FSW, but either way, we're looking at 1 year of full-time skilled work experience, right? And it has to be between tier 0 and tier 3. So if your work experience that IRCC picked as your NOC code falls under tier 0 to tier 3, that means you wouldn't be eligible. The second thing is maybe it was a skilled occupation, but your NOC code was incorrect. That could also be an error. So Julia, what I want to know is, do you agree with IRCC that your NOC code did not match your job description? Because again, it could potentially be an error. Maybe the officer didn't analyze the NOC properly. If the officer made an error, there could potentially be some avenues and remedies for you. But if you look at your NOC code and you look at your job description and they really do not align, at this point, it's a matter of reevaluating your options. You might need to re-enter the pool. I think for somebody like you, because you've previously been refused, it would be really helpful to, reach out for assistance. We'd be more than happy to help, whether it's something as simple as a express entry profile review or EE profile creation on your behalf, or if you even want us to maybe analyze your situation a little bit more. Not often, but occasionally we do reconsideration requests for clients that we didn't handle the application for, and that's only if we believe that IRCC made a mistake. So Julia, in your situation, it sounds like you need some help, especially since it is a PR application. I would recommend reaching out, and I'll just drop our email address for you in the chat there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Asha. And I would say, like, this is so common, more common than not. I've actually helped quite. We've worked with quite a number of applicants who were in this situation. One, and I'll give you some examples just so that if you're listening, you can understand the differences. There was one who her job was her job title said she was a finance director, but her job description was just an accountant.
Mm.
So what your company calls you does not matter. It's the description of the knock that it actually aligns with. There was one client too that we had worked with where her background was she was working as a store manager, but her job description matched the store supervisor. So when you're looking at your knock code, I think there's a video on YouTube that I did that describes how to assess, how to analyze your knock code. There's so many steps we typically go through with our clients to really determine the knock code. And even in our PR applications, we don't just leave it loose-ended, especially if it's one of those confusing knock codes. We take it a step further to do a knock analysis to ensure that the officer who will be looking at this application really sees and is convinced as to how we got to the decision to choose that knock for our clients. So important, very common error that we do see with permanent residence applications from time to time. Yeah, thanks for asking that. Okay, Amanda has a question here. Amanda, we don't know where the next CEC draw is. As you put that up, we checked if there was going to be any CEC draw. Yes, they are still in Canada focus, and I hope they come through with the CEC draw here sometime soon, but there's none in the horizon at least today, but maybe anything is possible. It is Thursday. We might get it today or maybe a Friday. Who knows? IRCC is up to changing things these days on us. So yeah.
Florence, what do you think the next draw is going to be? A little bit off topic here, but what is
off topic? I think the next draw is actually probably going to be one of the categories that they recently announced. I have a strong feeling that it's probably going to be that. They've done a couple of CECs this year. They've done French. Yeah. I have a feeling it's probably going to be a category-based draw, and then maybe CEC would come next. That's what I'm thinking. But it wouldn't hurt if they just do both. They do one category on the same day. We would still love them for that. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think is going to happen?
I'm leaning towards education. I think
because education. Specifically,
because it's a brand new category. I'm hoping. I don't know, but I hope the next draw is going to be education. But honestly, anybody's guess is as good as mine when it comes to IRCC these days. Yeah, so we'll have to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, you're taking the next one there on StreamYard.
Yeah, absolutely. So Nazara has a question. My visa was denied last year due to insufficient funds. The refusal letter and GCMS notes mention concerns about my financial situation. I was my own sponsor in that application. If I want to reapply with a family member, my dad as my sponsor, does he need to show proof of funds for all 4 years of tuition and living expenses in his bank account? Also, do you think it's better for me to be my own sponsor rather than relying on a family member? She also made mention of showing a year tuition fee and living expenses in my previous application. So, couple things, right? So with the study permit application, IRCC's minimum requirement is show tuition fees, living expenses, and travel costs for 1 year. But when you're doing a program that's 4 years in duration, they want you to have a very clear plan as to how you're going to generate those funds for the remainder of your program. So Nazara, if you only showed funds for a year's tuition fee and living expenses, although you've met the minimum requirement there, and the money was in your own account, the officer was probably wondering what your plan was in the long term, right? Because if you, as the sponsor, came to Canada and you were studying, you would no longer have access to like generating the same amount of income that you were generating before, which leads to questions of how you're going to support yourself. So what I would do is, it's good that you have money in your own account. That's perfect. And reapplying with your dad as a sponsor could absolutely be helpful because he could be the one to generate funds for you for the remaining 3 years.
Absolutely. Excellent. All right. DZ Calling here has a question. I'm probably going to pronounce your Instagram handles wrong, your names incorrect. Just forgive me, but when I read the question, you'll know it's you I'm talking about. So my kids have been refused twice. First was that they didn't have significant ties back home. Second was I was a parent and I had significant ties in Canada, but still was refused on an open work permit. So when it comes to significant ties, sometimes it's always, I guess my first question is that did you get the GCMS note, right? GCMS note again will tell us, was this really the reason that the officer really wanted to refuse for? This is just a checkbox. But when it comes to ties, especially, one of the things that we do for our clients is when we see that there are potential things where it's like, oh, the officer may try to refuse because of this, we go ahead of the game and start to tackle those concerns with case laws to address any potential officer's concern that may be there for that particular client. With the ties to home country, there are other things beyond the close family members that are used as ties. So at that point, when you're applying for the kids, it's not just talking about the kids alone, is thinking about the primary applicant, the person they are coming to visit, the person they are coming with. What are the ties that you've shown as part of your application that you will leave at the end of your stay? It's very subjective, honestly. It really depends on the officer. It really depends on how your overall application is packaged, all the information in the application and how the case is argued as well. So having ties in Canada does not mean that the application should be refused, because if not, so many of our clients who we've successfully brought over here would have been refused applications. So it boils down to how it's structured and how convincing you are to the officer that should things go wrong, that you're unable to extend your stay in Canada, that you have enough going on for your family back home, that you will leave Canada and not remain in Canada illegally. So those are the things that your application has to be convincing on for that as well. But I would say if you've not received your GCMS note, definitely get full details into it. And we're happy to work with you on a reapplication. Like I said, reapplying is typically not a straightforward application on tough cases like this. It's always trying to do legal research to back up every decision and every argument that we'll be putting into the application to support your application as well. As long as every other thing checked off, then that is an added benefit to your application. Asha?
Okay, let me get to the next one. So Joan has a question, not a refusal question, but are there pathways an international student can use for PR, or the student would have to wait until they've gotten their PGWP? So Joan, that depends. For a lot of our PNPs, for example, those typically require job offers and having status as a worker in Canada. But with express entry, if you do have foreign work experience, like 1 year of skilled work experience outside of Canada between tier 0, tier 3, you have CLB level 7, and you meet the 67-point requirement for the federal skilled worker stream, you could actually enter the express entry pool through federal skilled worker while still being an international student. And maybe you qualify for a category-based draw, such as healthcare or education or trades, or there's all these categories that IRCC is drawing for now. Some of our provinces also nominate people directly from the express entry pool. So it is definitely possible to get PR as an international student without waiting to get your PGWP. Florence, I don't know if you want to just briefly mention the decision that we just had today.
Yes, so we also just got a decision today for an international student. I know I say this all the time, that applied for PR. He just finished his program December here, January, but we had applied for his PR since last year. So if you're an international student in Canada, you're listening to me and you don't have an express entry profile, you may have already missed an opportunity for you to apply for permanent residence. So this guy that we just got a PR approval for this morning, he's a French speaker. He came to Canada as an international student. He was still studying, but went ahead, had an express entry profile created. And when the cutoff for the French draw was as low as 410 last year, he received an ITA. We submitted an application for him. This guy does not even need a PGWP anymore, because guess what? He is now permanent resident. So it is possible, even though not everybody will be able to benefit from it. But I always say, position yourself for opportunities. If he was waiting around to say, when I graduate, when I get 1 year work experience, before I even take my language test, before I write my exams, he would have missed out on that draw that happened last year. So position yourself means get in the express entry pool, maximize your points, have a profile that is completely optimized so that if there is any opportunities out there, you could potentially receive that invitation. And that, of course, is the express entry route as well that does exist. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Ari has a question here on Instagram, which is actually another very popular way of refusals that we see for PR. And she said, hi, I had a PR, he or she said, hi, I had a PR refusal. And the reason was that my police check was not acceptable. But the police check mentioned, they mentioned was not even from the right country. What can I do? That's exactly what we talked about at the beginning, that sometimes the refusal could be a complete error, a complete mistake. If you're looking at it and you've never been to that country, you've not lived in that country for the 6 months or more period that IRCC requires, then you should be requesting a reconsideration, because that is potentially an error. And the problem with these types of refusal is that, especially with PR application, when it's refused, you can't just reapply. You have to go back to the beginning and start all over again, get back into the express entry pool and do all of these things. So I would say if that's the case, request a reconsideration, and we can certainly look at your case and help you out with that. Definitely reach out to us. But I would also say that we have seen situations where the police clearance was refused because for certain countries, there are also certain types of police clearance that need to be requested. And IRCC specifies this on their website as well. So if it's more like the wrong police clearance being submitted, then that's a different story. But if it's not a country that you have any business with, then you should be requesting a reconsideration on that one.
Do you want me to grab the next one?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. So Ayobami has a question. I'm about to apply for PGWP. There was a term I was part-time. Please, what would you suppose I do? So Ayobami, my first question is, were you part-time in your final semester, or was it a semester that was not your final semester? Because if it wasn't your final semester that you did a part-time course load, that is definitely a problem and something that you need to address in your PGWP application. So with the PGWP, IRCC is looking at that you've maintained the, that you've maintained the conditions of your study permit, you've maintained full-time status as a student, you didn't have any gaps or leave or part-time semesters, things like that. So when you're applying for a PGWP, IRCC wants you to provide a official completion letter as well as a transcript. So on your transcript, it's going to be pretty obvious to the officer that you had a part-time course load. Address it up front. And depending on what your justification is or what your explanation is, you want to also have supporting documents to show the officer what happened. So if that's something that you would like assistance with, something like that, again, we'd be more than happy to help with, because you want to ensure, like with the PGWP, you want to ensure you get your application right the first time. Because for a lot of people, they're applying when they still have a valid study permit. And because they put in that PGWP application, they're allowed to work. But during the processing of the PGWP, study permit expires, application gets refused. Now you have to restore. You can't work anymore. It just becomes a headache.
It's very complicated.
It becomes a headache. So please do it right the first time.
Yes, do it right the first time. And a lot of times, I'm just going to chip in there just because of certain cases we've seen recently here. A lot of time, people always wonder, getting legal expertise and legal guidance and professional guidance, people think, it's too expensive, or the cost of it. But I always say, take the time to ask yourself, especially under the climate that we're in right now with IRCC, what are the risks that I'm looking at? For example, we've had several clients where they fall into that situation where Asha just said, submitted that PGWP application or any other application, especially if you're in country, your risks are very high. Submitted the application, there was one that just forgot to upload the transcript. And IRCC was not kind enough to ask, send me the transcript. They refused the application. Now, the moment the application got refused, the spouse is now out of status. The main applicant is now out of status. The spouse is out of status as well. They immediately have to stop working. This was a family that both of them were working and bringing in X amount of money every month. They now have to stop working and wait for an extended period of time that we don't know what that length of time would be. before they can actually get back into working. So when you think about all of those little things, especially if you're not very confident or you have questions or you have a complicated situation, you might want to seek professional guidance, again, to increase the chances and reduce the risk of any errors in the application that you're submitting as well. Okay. All right. We have 15 minutes left. We're going to keep going here. I'm going to take one on Instagram and you take one on StreamYard. Thank you everyone for joining. If you missed out on the from the session when we started, we talked about some key things, really important information. So you can always circle back and watch this again on any platform you're on. It'll be live on there once we're done. So you can see that again. Meet Patel has a question here. Should I request to give language tests due to passport expiry of my first work permit application? So this question is more like you had a PGWP before, and now we've not had this particular situation. You had a PGWP, but you were not given the full duration. Now you want to go back and get the full duration of your PGWP. However, now language requirement is required for PGWP. Do you need to include a language test? I'm going to give you two answers because we've not seen this before. I would say in your application that you should be very clear to the officer that you're extending under the previous rules, that you were eligible before they had issued it to you and you needed that extension. But Mr. Patel, I would say, please, if you can, and you should probably have a language test, just include a language test. It would not hurt to include it to avoid any drama, to avoid any stories. Just include a language test if you have one, just so then you don't meet an officer who doesn't really care about reading all of those explanations that you did the first time, but at least have it in there as part of your application. That would be my recommendation.
Okay, let's see. Mercy has a question. What are the rules regarding claiming work experience points for a family business? Employer is your brother. I don't want it to be a reason for refusal. So Mercy, it depends on your documents, right? I would sit down and make sure that you have a very thorough list of documents. So first things first is, do you have an official job offer that you were offered back when you started working for his company? Do you have pay stubs? And this is also really important too. IRCC recently wants to see bank statements showing salary deposits. So sometimes pay stubs alone are not enough. They want to see the money actually being deposited into your bank account with the employer's name and the salary and everything like that. And then reference letter. Would you be able to get a reference letter? So if you have strong supporting documents, then shouldn't be an issue. However, if you don't have strong supporting documents, then it's worth considering if you want to include that work experience.
And I know that people were always family business. We've had so many applicants who was a family business that they work for. If you legitimately work for your brother or work for your parents and there's all clear documents and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. Family business is recognized in Canada. Families build businesses together. It's recognized around the world. The bottom line, like Asha said, is clear supporting documents. Because if an officer sees that it is a family business, they're going to scrutinize it even more. Because they're going to want to make sure that this is not just made up, that you legitimately work there. And as long as you have all supporting documents, you will be fine with that application too. Someone has here, can I reapply after a mail that I'm no longer eligible for Express Entry came in? Yes, you can. Remember, Express Entry profile, your profile could have become ineligible for so many reasons. One, the profile is expired. Two, your language test expired. Three, there's something that's not updated properly on your application. There could be many reasons why it has said that it is ineligible. But I would also say that sometimes we've seen the Express Entry system just kick people out. So you want to review your whole eligibility requirement again. It could have been your age too. So maybe you were a certain age and you had enough points to meet the 67 point. You've clocked the birthday and now your points have dropped. You no longer qualify. There could be so many reasons. We can help you look into that and even recreate one as well for you. So if you could just send an email to ask at InfoPlace Canada, we could get started with looking at that to find out what went wrong and confirm that you're still eligible before an application, a profile is still recreated for you as well. Asha?
Okay. So we talked about the home care pathway already. As I mentioned before, they're focusing on the in-Canada applicants, but if somebody wants to apply outside of Canada for a job, you're looking at the job bank or like Indeed, just general websites that Canadian employers use, but they wouldn't qualify for the pilot at this time. Just take another one. How long does it take to receive GCMS? I have requested for one from last year, September, and not received it yet. So GCMS note requests on average take between 30 to 60 days. Sometimes they can take a little bit longer. So for you, you should either follow up or re-request your GCMS notes. Also, can your sponsor be a former supervisor and different nationality? My sponsor transferred his money to my account and I still have the money in an investment. Can I use that as proof of funds? Yes, you could use it as proof of funds, but this is a bit of a tricky one. So you want to ensure that you're accurately depicting how you came to accumulate those funds. So my first question, and IRCC is probably one of their first questions, is going to be, why would your former supervisor / boss sponsor you? So that's something that you want to ensure is covered, because if you're no longer working for that employer, why would they invest their funds into sponsoring you? So make sure that aspect is covered. He transferred the money to your account and you have the money in an investment. That's great. So include obviously proof of your investment, proof that he initially had transferred that money to you. Also, if the significant amount of proof of funds you're showing came from your sponsor, you also want to show your sponsor's source of funds. Absolutely. As well as your own. Yeah. So this one's a bit of a tricky one, Daisy. Just make sure you get that correct. If not, let us know. We'd be more than happy to help with your application.
Yeah. Awesome. Great. So that one, I think I answered that same question. We're coming close to the end here. Do we need police character certificate for May 31st? I'm sure this is caregiver. We don't have the document checklist for the caregiver program. So you should probably just request a police certificate just in case it is required. It would be good to have that on hand. We don't have the details yet, but that would be the thing to look out for. There's a question here for how long for a PR decision. It all depends on the path, but I think express entry is about 6 months. PNPs is anywhere from, I think it was showing like 24 months or something crazy, 21 months. So it really depends. But the truth is, if you have successfully applied for PR, you are eligible for a bridging open work permit in many cases as well. So there's not a lot of pressure. I would say no pressure. As long as you have applied, the key is applying, but also making sure that you've applied properly, because sometimes if it comes out that it was applied for incorrectly and you apply for that bridging open work permit, it could be refused. Like we had a client last year, which we just did a restoration for. Her PR application was refused, and then the bridging open work permit that she had in process was also refused as well. So it's just, again, even when you're submitting that PR application and you're happy you received an ITA, it's just making sure that it's complete, a very strong and accurate application has been submitted. But processing time is within that 6 to 24 months right now for PR, depending on the pathway that you're using. Asha?
Okay, we'll probably take maybe 1 or 2 more here. So Mercy said her brother's visiting visa was refused. The GCMS note talked about study permit. IRCC, the GCMS note talked about study permit duration and insufficient funds, even when we did not state anywhere that the application was for studying. He was visiting for my graduation in May. What are the steps we can take from here? Thank you. So, for example, of IRCC doesn't always know what they're doing. So if you applied for a visiting visa, GCMS notes, refusal letter, talking about study permit, obviously something went very wrong. So in a situation like that, I would request a reconsideration. Just point out to them that, hey, hello, we applied for a visiting visa, not a study permit, and just point out a couple of things there. I know obviously the visit date had passed. So, I mean, it's still worth putting in a reconsideration and seeing what happens there.
Yeah. And then I think even putting in that reconsideration, you can always, it was for a visiting visa. So you can always say, my brother still wants to come visit me. I would still love my brother to come, right? Still address those reasons and concerns and all of that. This obviously is a clear error and it happens. And I'll tell you guys one. The first time in my practice that I ever knew that IRCC makes mistakes, I had a client, we did an application. It was a visiting visa like this. And they refused the application. And the reason for the refusal was that the client had overstayed in Canada. And I was so surprised because I was like, he never told me that he had even come to Canada, because the only thing I knew was that he had applied before and was refused and could not. And then we did a GCMS note and all of that, but there was nothing that he's ever come to Canada before. So I called the client and I'm like, you could have told me, we would have addressed this, and that should not have been a problem in your application, because we always want our clients to be like, no matter how bad it is, tell us, we will figure out how to address it. The more upfront you are, the higher your chances of getting something positive, right? But in this particular situation, the guy was like stunned. He was like, no, I have never come to Canada before. That was literally the first time many years ago that I was like, whoa, this guy is making mistakes. And immediately I wrote back to IRCC for every reason of refusal they listed, tackled it and said, my client has never come. This is serious errors on my client's part, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
And we woke up the next morning to an approval. They didn't ask for any information. They literally just sent an approval. So this is just to let you know that, and that's why for us, we don't take every refusal that we has been refused. We always tell our clients, like, it's not the end until we have tackled it, right? So just an example here, clearly messy for your brother's case, looks like a clear error. Even the one thing of them talking about study permit when all you did was a visiting visa, that right there should be grounds for request for reconsideration.
They do make errors, Florence. I always think about the fact that I had a client who was refused for not disclosing a previous U.S. refusal, and he had a positive U.S. visa. I think like there was a point in time where I think there was something wrong with their system, because he wasn't the only one that this happened to. It happened a couple of times where people who were holding valid U.S. visas were getting refused for not disclosing prior U.S. refusals that did not exist.
Yes.
So their system glitches. I don't know what that's about.
Yeah, and honestly, I would also put out there for those officers that when these things happen and we write back to them and they take the time to look at the application again, thank you. Because not every time that everyone does. And it's always very frustrating when, clients are not able to, sometimes it finds like you reach a roadblock with fighting IRCC, but there's some exceptional visa officers that take pride in their work and would revisit, because whenever you're asking for a reconsideration, you're basically going to someone and telling them you did something that's incorrect here, right? You're telling them that, and then they have to own up to that mistake and reconsider the application. So we're always very grateful when that happens, and we just hope that we see even more of those as well. Okay, we're literally at a 2-minute mark here.
Last one.
Yeah, so I'll let you take a last one. There's so many interesting questions. But before I wrap up here, I'll just say lots of immigration questions that always come out. If you click on the link in our bio on our Instagram, you can also even email as well. I'm just going to put our contact details here on the screen. Send us an email. Write to the team. There's a contact us form on the link in our bio on Instagram, LinkedIn, and all of these places. Send a message in for your inquiry. But I would say that every person's question, sometimes for us to accurately answer immigration question, we need a little bit more time to understand your case, to advise you properly. And this is where a one-on-one consultation even trumps everything else, because then you have your own dedicated time with a consultant. Come into that meeting with all of your questions to get them answered. And you can always book these consultations on our website as well. Okay, Asha, take your last question and we're done.
Okay, let's add this one. So she applied for PR about a year ago for her family, was informed it's currently on security checked for about 6 months now. Unfortunately, my partner got arrested for a DUI. Would this affect our chances of approval? The answer to that is it could. And the reason for that is some countries don't consider DUIs to be a significant deal, like the US, for example, but Canada does consider it to be criminality. So we do have 11 grounds for inadmissibility. Criminality is one of them. So your partner could potentially be inadmissible depending on the circumstances, depending on how long ago, depending on if he was rehabilitated or can be deemed to be rehabilitated. And it could affect your chances because when you do have a inadmissible family member, especially in a PR application, it also makes you inadmissible as well. So definitely something that you should look into a little bit further and just ensure that all of your bases have been covered.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. That's it for us today, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It's always a great time hanging with you all, answering your questions. Again, like I said, we're always here to help, and we'll see you on our next session. I don't know what we have next, but there's one coming up next week. I think a lot of study permit questions today. So I think the one on Monday is on study permit. So if you're looking to apply for a study permit, you definitely don't want to miss the session coming up next Tuesday, March 11th. Definitely register for that one, and you can see this video again at the end of today. Asha, final words.
Thank you everyone for joining. It was so much fun chatting with you all and answering all of your questions, and we look forward to doing it again soon.
All right. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.